All right, we're back with Doug and Michael Yon. And again, the format we're using here is three consequential news events or observations these guys had within the last week and a prediction for you. So, Doug, why don't we start with you first? What's something you observed this week of interest?
Well, as far as things that are happening, it really is a target-rich environment. And I almost feel driven to talk about this ridiculous election coming up on Guy Fawkes Day, November 5th. Maybe that's for next week when we're closer to it. So lots of things to talk about. But before the disasters in Appalachia and Florida fade from memory and the news cycle drives on, I thought I'd just draw people's attention to FEMA because I've had no personal interaction with FEMA, fortunately. The only time I've seen them was during the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, when I was in New Orleans and rented a car and drove around the affected area. And one of the most interesting things that I saw there were about a dozen FEMA guys, all wearing their jackets with FEMA written across the back. And they were standing around in a circle, talking or being lectured to. And I watched them for about 5 minutes. And I asked myself, what the hell are these people doing here? I mean, Katrina was a huge disaster. And here's a dozen FEMA types, and they're just talking. So anyway, with this latest thing, I thought, who the hell is FEMA? What do they do? They were founded in 1979, but what do they do? They're the Federal Emergency Management Administration. That's what it stands for. And I went on their website and tried to find out stuff about them. And I'm not very competent, I must admit, playing with my computer and finding things, but I spent time and went from one thing to another. And I think there's a dearth of information. What I was able to determine is this, is that they don't actually help. They're not intended to help people when there's an emergency. They're intended to give money to people that are affected by the emergency after the fact. Now, I tried to find out how many employees that they have, and there aren't any current numbers. As best as I can determine, this agency has about 6,000 or 8,000 employees, and they don't do anything but distribute a few meals. They distributed some tarpaulins in this last disaster, but mainly they assist people in giving them money. Sometimes billions of dollars. I'm uncertain where it goes because individuals, they give dribs and drabs of $500 for this or $750 for that. And oddly, if you have a funeral, this is one of the big things that they mentioned on their website, is that if you've had a COVID death, they give you like $500 to bury the body. Well, that's rather odd. Federal emergency management and giving funeral money to COVID deaths. It's very strange. And it's an insurance agency where if you, apparently this is something that they've worked out with developers. A lot of houses are flooded. Now, why are these houses flooded? Don't people realize that if they live in a hurricane zone or a flood area, that maybe they should not build a house there? But FEMA has insurance, and that's where most of its money goes, towards bailing out people that have been flooded because they live in flood zones. So FEMA seems to me to be a giant scam that just pays for 6,000 or 8,000 FEMA people to drive around and look like they're doing something. And in this Appalachia thing, to pretend they're doing something, since there's nothing they can do, I mean, they don't have hammers and nails and shovels and that kind of thing. They don't build stuff or so they basically stop things from happening to show their presence. They're a totally counterproductive agency. And I don't want to go on too far, but I might as well cover this talking about FEMA. And I'd certainly like to hear from anybody that's got more boots on the ground experience with them. But on their website, one of the most disturbing things about it, they have four main raison d'etres. And two of them are listed as equity, which means giving money to Blacks and homosexuals and women and other protected classes. I thought that was pretty unusual for one of their four reasons for existing. And one of the other ones was climate response. It's like they've assigned themselves the duty of protecting the climate. This is strange for the Federal Emergency Management Administration. The other two things related to, helping people in floods and stuff like that. But two of the four things were equity and climate response. Anyway, I think that's about all I got to say about it. It's a scam. It ought to be abolished. It's one of the agencies should be pulled out by the roots. It was established in 1979. So I guess that was one of Jimmy Carter's parting gifts to the country. And it costs, once again, the numbers are sketchy and they vary from year to year. On average, about $6 billion per year, which goes into God knows whose pockets. It's all very sketchy. And yeah, they have an annual report. But digging through that thing, which I tried to do, I said, it's just too much brain damage. And I think I've indicated it's a gigantic waste of money. It should be abolished post haste. Anyway, I'm sure you got something.
According to ChatGTP, the fiscal year 2024 budget was 32.2 billion.
Oh, well, that's quite possible with where did all that money go? They haven't built any houses. They haven't. What have they done with all that money? Just
it's funny that you start talking about FEMA because I was just looking them up. We're on the same wavelength on that. My battle buddy, Ann Vandersteel, we'd gone out into the Darien Gap and across the U.S. border and all kinds of things together. She's my partner in Operation Burning Edge. So she's been in North Carolina since almost the beginning, right? And about maybe 5 days ago or 5 days ago, she was at this new FEMA camp that they're building. And it looks just like a FOB, which is a forward operating base. And this video that she made went viral, right? And so the guards were armed and they started talking. And so she's got it on video. They're actually talking and they call a supervisor out. And these tornado shelters keep going by, right? And did you see that, Matt?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, and so that was Ann Vandersteel, and she's been out into the Darien Gap and way out in those jungles and stuff. So she's constantly doing things like this. So I looked up FEMA as well, and it looks like they were formed on April Fool's 1979, coincidentally, and maybe not. Jimmy Carter, of course, the guy who gave away our Panama Canal and somehow structured that information more as if we're returning their canal. Returning whose canal? It was our canal. It was never. We are the ones who helped make Panama. Panama didn't exist until we made it and we cleaved it off from Colombia so we could make the canal. But somehow then that became anyway, whatever. That's the same president, right? So I just asked Ann just before we came on, like 20 minutes ago, what's going on? What should I say? And she's talking about FEMA, right? This is a message that just came in. I asked her what's going on in North Carolina. She said, we need money raised to get campers for people who have lost all their homes and cars, etc. Clearly, there is a long-term federal plan coordinated with state and local authorities to drag permitting processes for those who lost homes in mineral-rich areas. People will not be able to pay mortgages or property that do not have houses for up to 4 years while they wait for the process to be completed. This will result in the loss of land and ownership by big corporations that have mineral interest in the area. The people need to be able to stay on their land so that it is not, so that it will not be imminently domained. Anyway, that's Ann Vandersteel on the ground there. Yeah, pretty amazing.
Well, they say there's a big lithium deposit there. Lithium collapsed 5% from their peak. So there's kind of a glut of lithium, but who knows what they're up to. You know, remember when Jesse Ventura was governor of Minnesota, and he did an investigation, or maybe it was after he was governor, and there are these FEMA camps around the US, and I haven't heard anything about since then, but they're kind of like, well, you said forward operating bases, they kind of look like federal prisons. And what the hell are they doing there? Just empty camps. Have you heard about this?
Oh yeah. I mean, I could go on and on. I mean, Ann and I and our team, I mean, I know people that build those things, like personally know them, spend a lot of time with them. And same thing in Ireland, by the way. Ireland's thick with those things. I had somebody map them out in Ireland. I've got all kinds of drone footage and whatnot. Yeah. And Ireland's got them. They're all over the place. They're in Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, of course, big camps.
Yeah. Well,
So who builds them, where all that money comes from?
it's
And
kind of ominous. And that's a huge amount of money that they frittered away last year. I mean, even in today's world, 35 billion is a lot of money. That agency should be abolished, and like most, it should be pulled up by the roots, and Agent Orange should be scattered where it grew.
You know, some of those crazy conservatives years ago were saying that eventually they would take Walmarts and put people in them, right? And they are doing it. I have physically been to one in Brownsville, Texas, that's operated by Southwest Key. No kidding, for sure, 100%. They keep children in there. They keep boys in there that are coming across the border, 100%. And so we got it all in the news, and other people have gotten it in the news. Yeah, operated by Southwest Key. So it's not just new camps that they build. They literally take over those Walmarts. It's right there in the middle of you can go see it. It's a super center Walmart.
Oh, wait a minute. What do they do with the stuff that was in the Walmart? Maybe it's a Kmart, which are empty buildings.
No, that one is a former Walmart, but I mean, it's right there. You can look it up online, and you'll see many articles. You'll see Ann and me and others that have been there reporting on it, and many people now. It's been a documentary by Ryan Matta recently, who just messaged me last night. Ryan Matta's got at least two. I haven't seen the second one yet. I saw the first one, but he's been tracking these missing children. There are a lot of missing children. Like, I don't know how many. I mean, one estimate is over 400,000. I don't know. We see them coming across the border every single day when I'm down there. Keep in mind, I've spent months across that southern border, all the way across from SpaceX to San Diego. SpaceX is at the Rio Grande, the mouth of the Rio Grande in Texas, right? So people cross right there, all the way across, all the way to San Diego. I have personally seen thousands and thousands of children, and the Border Patrol helps load them on the buses. I mean, these aren't children that are, some of them are at, nighttime coming over the wall and that sort of thing, but a lot of them are just walking right in, and the Border Patrol help them get on. I got endless videos that I shot myself. Where are these children going to? A lot of them are alone. Very strange, isn't it?
A lot of strange things going on in the country today, and FEMA is certainly doing its share to muddy the waters at great expense everywhere.
Michael, what's your first observation would you like to share?
Well, when I was with Doug, Misako and I spent a couple of weeks with Doug, we call it U-Doug now, University of Doug. It's like a joke between Misako, Ganaha, and me. That time was so valuable. We learned a lot. We launched the Jones Plantation, but we also met with some interesting people while we were in Thailand together. And one of the things that I've seen with those people and others that I keep meeting is a lot of the people that are the most experienced traveling around the world, working in places like Hong Kong and China and just all over the place, Vietnam. They've been all over the world, and yet now they're confused about where to go, which is something that Doug has talked about numerous times. So at one point, Doug said he made his choices between, and Doug, you've been to like 150 countries, right? And so you were having that difficulty. Should it be the antipodes, as you say, Thailand or Venezuela, or I'm not Venezuela, but Argentina or Uruguay, right? And I see these other people that are they've got basically infinite choices. You know, they've got there's money is zero problem for them, and yet they're not exactly sure where to go, and they've been all over the world. I find that fascinating, actually. Are you finding that? I know you found it with the people that we met with.
Yeah, well, you go back to what Joe Lewis said, you can run, but you can't hide. And the world has become a very small place in just about every way possible. So if the United States collapses, and it's on its way, there really is no substantial free country that will be left. Really a bad situation.
That's true. It's quite clear. Yeah.
Okay. So it's not just your average American that has uncertainty about what to do to prepare. It's people at all levels of the socioeconomic ladder, experience, and knowledge ladder as well.
The more sophisticated people, let's say the ones who have been around more, like Doug and you and these other people that we're meeting, they're the ones who have the most problems figuring it out. The people that know less about the world are the ones who have a definite answer, like I'm going to go to Panama, which I'll tell you right off the bat is a mistake. Do not do it, right? Unless you're just going on vacation. Do not move to Panama. Or even Costa Rica. I wouldn't take any of the Central American countries. Although I've been to all of them, all the way from Canada to Colombia. I wouldn't, and I like Central America. There's some people that are moving to El Salvador. I would actually recommend El Salvador for a vacation, but I'm not sure about the long-term stability of anywhere there. I was in El Salvador this year. I actually liked El Salvador. Can you imagine just even 10 or 15 years ago recommending somebody take their family on vacation in El Salvador? They think you're completely
out of the question. Out of the question. Yeah.
Now I would say take your kids, and I'm not gonna recommend you do something dangerous. Take your kids to El Salvador. It's safe. The world's, we've seen it change a lot. It continues to do so.
Well, they've got 65,000 gang members that are newly imprisoned, and lots more have run north to greener pickings in the U.S. But what's going to happen with all those criminals that are locked up and they haven't been tried? So how long are they going to stay locked up, and what's going to happen?
I don't know. I don't
either. Seems like things are good now, but that's an unstable situation when you got that many young men locked up without trial.
Yeah.
All right, Doug, what's your second one for this week?
Well, what have I got here? When Michael and I were in Phuket, when we were talking to our lawyer friend there, he pointed out that there are 94 pot stores,
100.
licensed pot stores in Phuket. And it's not a real big amount. That seems like a lot of pot stores.
9,400 in the whole country, 9,400 in the country.
And am I correct? It was 94 or do I have that number in Phuket alone?
Oh, I don't know, but I could at least 94 in Phuket. There was a lot.
Yeah, they were everywhere.
How many are there. Yeah, they were everywhere.
So we were remarking on the fact now. Yeah, I'm all for the legalization of drugs. It's a matter of personal responsibility. I've tried lots of drugs because I've always said, I'll try anything once, twice if I like it. But the fact is, I don't like drugs. They cloud the mind, and I don't like operating with a clouded mind. So in order to know what I'm talking about, I've tried a number of drugs, but I disapprove of them, but I think they should be legal. And the reason we have a drug problem is it's a psychological problem that we have in the U.S. It's part of the ongoing collapse of the civilization, actually, where people are running away from their problems and trying to hide from them by dodging reality via drugs. Anyway, that's a different story. But what I wanted to point out was all these all these pot stores in Thailand. On the one hand, as a libertarian, I say, hey, let people do what they want. But on the other hand, if everybody is fucked up with clouded minds because they're puffing pot all day or doing other drugs, this is a very bad thing from an economic point of view, a social point of view, all kinds of points of view. And so I wanted to find out how many pot stores just are there in the US, just in legal states. And it turns out that at this moment, there are 12,500 operating pot stores in the US. Well, that's a lot. I mean, was pot a problem in the 60s? Yeah. I mean, sure, you'd get some weed, I guess, and smoke it with your buddies. And it was like getting drunk. But it's entirely too easy to get stoned and whacked out now. So for what it's worth, that's the pot situation. And it's not good. And I speak as somebody that thinks that everything should be free and easy.
Yeah, I was going to bring up the weed thing as well, because everywhere I go around Thailand now, I see more and more of these things. I'm sensitized to them though. Like last night, I was going to a meeting, and outside the taxi door it literally said weed delivery in English. So I looked it up quickly online, and there's weed delivery places all over. Look online. If you web search, you'll see there's weed delivery services all around Bangkok. You can like order a pizza in dope, you know? And, you know, I was like you insofar, Doug, insofar as I've always thought people should be able to do what they want. It's a matter of personal responsibility. So like you won't see a history of me opposing this through the years. It just didn't happen. It's only as time has gone on and I've realized how weaponized it is, and you know, more studying brainwashing and that sort of thing, and watching what, for instance, the Chinese are doing, coming through the Darien Gap and running dope farms all over Maine. Now they've got their own bank that just got busted, according to the news. Matt and I were talking about it last week. There's all kind. I mean, if I were going to attack your country and you let me put dope stores all over the place and grow the dope, oh, of course. And the Chinese talk about doing things like this in their book, Unrestricted Warfare. I read the book. It's a very interesting book, Unrestricted Warfare, written by two Chinese colonels. And, you know, in the book, Rape of the Mind, it's a 1956 book on brainwashing by Joost Meerlo. I read that book very closely, actually. I studied that book, is a more accurate way to put it. He talks about, Joost Meerlo, the Dutch psychologist, talks about how China was running a drug war in the 1960s, 50s or 60s. I'm sorry, it would have been the 50s, because the book came out in 1956. But he talked about how in North Thailand, the Chinese were running a, because there was a drug war going in the 60s and 70s up there, quite intense, actually. And, but how the Chinese were running this drug war to weaken the Thais and also to make money. And actually, I wrote a series of dispatches from Afghanistan in 2006 called The Perfect Evil. And I described how the Taliban were using the, you know, by the way, how the Taliban got so much poppy going was when the Soviets came in, the Afghans have these underground aqueduct systems called Karez, Karez. And I would see these Karez all over the place. It's very interesting, very difficult to build a Karez. Some of the Karez can take generations, 100 years to build. And you'll see the Karez is like underground. It's an art and a science how to build. They can go 10, 20, 30 miles, right? So it's an underground water system that has to be just the right angle and everything else. And you'll have all these villages along the Karez down the way from the mountain. So they'll dig the Karez where the water collects underneath. And so the Mujahideen at the time of the Soviet war, they were they were using those to hide weapons in and to go from place to place to attack the Russians and go back down like the gopher in Caddyshack, right? So the Russians were blowing those things up, right? And so these caress systems, and that's how they made their farms work, right? So there's huge amounts of farms that depended, like pomegranate farms, and especially like grapes and that sort of thing. And so I found actually a translated Russian manual on how to blow those up. Anyway, I wrote about those extensively in Afghanistan, took a lot of photos of the Kerezes. But once the Russians started destroying that stuff, because they were destroying the enemy's ability to hide weapons and move undetected, then the Mujahideen started growing opium, because opium is much more robust against the weather. It's a cash crop. You don't have to, you plant it now and you harvest it later that year, and you make money immediately, right? Whereas the grapes and the pomegranates, it takes years for the trees or the vines, right? And so the poppies require a lot less water as well, right? So so they started growing a lot of poppy, right? And when I talked with many of the farmers that were growing poppy, I was out in their poppy fields all the time. It was like Wizard of Oz, like straight up Wizard of Oz, huge fields of poppy, right? And actually in Wizard of Oz, those were papaver somniferum. You see, they fall asleep in the papaver means poppy, somniferum means sleeping poppy, like Soma from the book, what's that, 1984 or
Brave New World.
Brave New World. So somniferum, papaver somniferum is sleeping poppies, right? And you see they fall asleep in the poppy. Well, anyway, so they started growing these poppy, and they, harvest. But when I talk with the farmers, I was out with them all the time, and they would say, no, all of them would say, I don't like to grow this because this is much more work and I make less money. I want to grow grapes. I want to grow pomegranates. They make more money and it's easier, right? But they grow that because their caress systems and whatnot have been destroyed, or their vineyards have been chopped down because they could hide things in them. Anyway, the bottom line is that was how they started funding the war. And of course, upstream, downrange, most of the heroin and whatnot that was in UK at the time was actually coming through Pakistan, up through Russia and all that, and getting over to United Kingdom and places like that. It's interesting. So in other words, drug addicts in the United Kingdom were funding the war that was blowing up the British soldiers I was with, right? It's quite interesting how the drug wars are quite real, going in both directions. There's no way out of this, to my knowledge, and there's no pretty way to have your freedom and then let the enemy use that freedom to basically put a hellfire missile through your house, right? But, because I think everybody watching this will have had at least one alcoholic or one drug addict or one gambling, somebody addicted to gambling within somewhere in their family or friend structure. And if you have one alcoholic or drug addict or serious gambler under your roof, it's like your house got hit with a hellfire missile. I mean, the windows are blown out. Kids don't go to university because of that sort of thing. And anyway, what I'm getting to is I'm all about freedom, obviously. At the same time, I know how our enemies are using that against us.
Yeah, in particular, I'm sorry, Doug, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say that I heard you on a podcast with Matt Bracken this morning, and he mentioned something that I was aware of, but I had forgotten about, and that is that a lot of us look at George Soros as the bad guy. We see him funding the migration stuff. We see him funding local DAs that are Black Lives Matter supporters. Well, before all that, he funded drug decriminalization and marijuana legalization programs widely in the US and around the world. He put, the best number I could find is something like $250 million into financing those efforts. So that in and of itself is suspicious to me.
He was using drug warfare. He was using drug warfare. I mean, straight up hardcore. And, people have talked about that for years, how Soros was doing that. Right. And also, Matt, as you know, Bracken brought it up today, but, they saw like this is, I mean, again, we want to be free. We want people to have their own responsibility and whatnot. But it's also, I mean, it's a straight up weapon. There's no way around it that's used as a weapon.
Well, and there's no easy solution because people would say, well, drugs are bad. Let's illegalize drugs. But that is totally counterproductive because it creates a black market where it artificially raises the price of drugs and it makes it profitable where it might not be in a free market. So you get these syndicates that are created, just as the mafia was created by illegalizing alcohol in the 1920s. All these syndicates and cartels have been created by illegalizing drugs because it creates an arbitrage opportunity, which they take advantage of. So I don't see any way out of this. It's part of a
It is what it
collapsing
is.
civilization. You can't illegalize it for moral reasons and practical reasons, but at the same time, you don't want the drugs there. So you've got to change the way people think and act and perceive, and that's
You gotta make a stigmify it. Like if you do drugs, you're a bad guy. You know what I mean? And so I know people say, "Well, no, I'm not a bad guy," but you've got to attack them with information more, right? Because otherwise,
And the worse the economy gets, the more people will try to hide from reality by clouding their mind and going into a dream world. So
and by the way, when I was studying the poppy issue in Afghanistan and other countries, I was here in Thailand studying it. Actually, I was out looking at the royal projects, and one of the reasons that they sell so many flowers on the streets in Thailand is because in the royal projects that the King Rama IX, who was an incredible king of Thailand, he did a lot of work to replace the poppy with coffee. They didn't used to grow coffee with the hill tribes, but he got them. I actually was given a private tour of a lot of these things years ago because I was trying to figure out what went wrong in Afghanistan. Like all the farmers I talk with don't want to do poppy, but it takes a long time to get their grape vineyards going again, right? So I came over. I went to meet with General what's his name that we talked about when we were in Phuket together, that used to run the drug war. What's his name?
you mean Barry McCaffrey?
Yeah. I had lunch with Barry McCaffrey a couple times, right? And because he used to be the drug czar, so I wanted to talk with him. And first time he actually asked to meet with me, and so we were talking, and I asked him about Thailand, and he goes, "Oh, the reason that Thailand was able to nip it was because King Rama IX had so much moral clout here. He just came up and said." It's untied to grow poppy, right? So that made a lot of people stop right there, but a lot of other people continued. So he started with the royal projects up there, which he did all over Thailand. But so he started growing. He got all these scientists out there, got the water going, started building the roads and figuring out which what they could grow up there. And then so it was a silver lead thing. It's like, we'll help you make money if you grow this, that, and the other. We'll help you get it to market. We will guarantee we'll buy it from you. And if you don't do that, we'll send the army, right? And so that's why there's not much poppy out there. I mean, I've been out with the Hill Tribe people. Some of them still grow up, but it's not like it used to be. Now it's methamphetamines.
All right, Doug, what's your third observation for the week?
Well, what do I have here? It's once again, this may not be current news for this week, but it's once again, the news cycle is driving on, and I wanted to mention it before it's lost in the collective memory. It wasn't so long ago that these 3 female presidents of universities, Harvard, MIT, and what was the other one? Anyway, all totally woke, socialist-leaning type people. And then, of course, they resigned, Claudine Gay at Harvard and so forth, a diversity hire of the highest level. Well, okay, what am I leading up to here? It's that in that environment promoted by these horrible college presidents of these highly prestigious universities, then we have the Palestine, Gaza, Israel thing, where they all want to hang the Jews and riots and all this type of thing. So I asked myself, these universities that are the situs for horrible people and horrible riots by their students, how rich are they? And of course, Harvard, which is the richest of them all, has been described as a hedge fund with an attached university. It has an endowment of about $50 billion. That's quite a bit. And you ask yourself, what are they doing with that money? Because it costs an arm and a leg to go to school at Harvard. And it's the same at Yale, Princeton, Stanford. They're all in the $35 billion range. And you might ask yourself, how come these universities became so incredibly wealthy? And of course, all that money probably has had some effect on the corruption there. They can afford to make mistakes when they have that much money. Well, it occurred to me that a lot of people of goodwill leave their estates for the betterment of humanity, and they think, well, education is the betterment of humanity, and outfits like Harvard and Stanford are the best. I'll leave all my money there. And this is incredibly stupid, considering that these universities have been totally taken over, as these scandals with Claudine Gay and her pals illustrated, by the left. People that hate capitalism, hate money, hate America. But, Ayn Rand used to apatheicize businessmen. She thought businessmen were the greatest. Well, okay, they are the greatest in a way because they're responsible for producing real things. And that's wonderful. All the good things we have are kind of produced by businessmen. But the fact is that individual businessmen are not to be idealized the way Rand did, because they have no philosophical bases. They're good at earning money, but they're not good at giving it away, because they're in effect buying the left ropes that will be used to hang them in the future. And that's why I think one of the good things going on now is that enrollment at these top universities is dropping, because people see it's a waste of time and money. And they're not going to universities, which, of course, your son Maxim is illustrating excellently in his weekly blogs. Anyway, a bit of a ramble here, but I think that one of the things we're going to see, and this is kind of a semi-prediction, is these universities are either going to have to change radically back to what they were 100 years ago, or they're going to dry up and blow away. They're not going to be getting the money coming in endowments from dead businessmen as much. So this whole thing with universities being woke and communist leaning, it's just got to change. Reality will reassert itself. Anyway, just something I thought I'd point out.
It looks like, Doug, I found a stat here. It says in 2023, universities received a total of $58 billion in philanthropic support.
That's absolutely crazy.
We teach more people more responsible things, and they don't do that. They don't send us $1 billion.
I mean, it's shocking. That's a huge number. That's a huge number.
Yeah.
All right, Michael, what's your third thing?
Well,
I think you're going to talk about Ukraine 970th day or something like that. Yeah.
Today is about the 970th day of the short Ukraine war that should have been over 960 days ago, according to the war hawks. Something that I mentioned over and over and over again. If you predict three things about every new war, you're almost always going to be right. This war is going to grow. I do this all the time, and people think I'm a genius. It's going to grow, and it's going to grow unpredictably, and it's going to go longer than you thought. And then, a year passes, and I'm like, wow, you were right again. I'm like, I guess, yeah. It's like dropping an apple. I think this apple is going to hit the floor, right? It's like, it's that predictable. I mean, this is like cheating, all the angles of this triangle will add up to 180. And so, and so we're in day number 970 approximately in the Ukraine war, and there's no end in sight, which many of us predicted. I don't know when it's going to end. I don't know. I have no idea, because wars are unpredictable, and wars, like fires, you can start it, but you can't turn it off. And so likewise with Israel, after the clear false flag attack on Hamas, or using Hamas as useful idiots, it was actually a green flag attack on October 7th of 2023. Israel still has not defeated Hamas. Little Hamas in Gaza, the easiest enemy, while they've widened that other front out with Lebanon. My alerts were going off all day today. Israel's under attack. And I get to have this app where, they're getting drone attacks and rocket attacks all day into Israel, right? So now they got two fronts going, and they haven't beat Hamas, much less Hezbollah, and they obviously want to pick the fight with Israel. With Iran. And so my prediction is that war will grow, because, I know I'm going to be right. And it's just history is going to be right. It's not me. I'm just channeling history. And Israel will be actually increasingly at this point lucky to survive, because they're hanging by this thread called the United States. And the United States is clearly going into some very, very rough times. And if we lose focus on Israel, it's goodbye, Israel. It's that serious. They've started a war I know people are going crazy when I just said they started the war, but they are clearly pushing and widening the war. It could end up ultimately being the end of Israel. Will that happen? I do not know. Do I want it to happen? No. But that doesn't, if you're an oncologist, you don't diagnose somebody as not having cancer just because you don't want them to have cancer, right? And so, and I'm just saying, as a war correspondent, I could easily see where Israel could end up dying by their own hand.
Wow.
Makes sense to me. You've got, what's the population of Israel? About 10 million, of which about 3/4, 7.5 million, are Jews. And there are about 1.5 billion, and growing rapidly, Muslims in the world. And in the Holy Koran, it says many times that it's the obligation of a good Muslim to kill the Jew. So it can't end well. It can't end well. I totally agree with you, Michael.
Yeah, and keeping in mind that I think about 12% of Israel is Orthodox, and they won't join the army. They're not going into the IDF unless they're dragged in. And I think that has come up. And a lot of the Israelis are, a lot of the Jews, and I'm on a private chat with just me and some Orthodox Jews. I'm the only non-Jew on there. They hate Israel. They hate Israel more than Hamas does. It's really epic. I didn't realize how deep that hatred goes between many Jews and the Zionists. It's quite intense.
Yeah, there's quite a split in the Jewish community, because I'm not on the same group that you are, but I'm on another group, which are about 30 guys, and they're almost all Jews. I'm one of 2 or 3 Goyim on the chat, and these people are intensely pro-Israel, but they're all rich American Jews. So there's a split within the Jewish community about the state of Israel, obviously.
Yeah, mix those together and they're going to go hypergolic, right? Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So, insoluble problem, and certainly there's no solution the U.S. can offer. It's like joining the feud between the Hatfields and the McCoys. It's pointless.
It's just a software conflict. It's like, this belief system doesn't mesh with that one. And they have a conflict, and they turn into a tornado when they get together.
Yeah, well, you got to let them sort it out. We don't have a dog in that fight, or we shouldn't anyway.
I agree.
All right, Doug, your prediction for today.
Well, I'm going to make an extremely dangerous prediction. I think I'm going to be correct, but interest rates. And to introduce my prediction and say why it's dangerous, I'd like to tell my favorite financial joke. And here it is. Einstein dies and goes to heaven. St. Peter greets him, happy to see you, Mr. Einstein. We're getting your digs in order, but we have a temporary housing shortage here in here in heaven for obvious reasons, because we're a centrally managed economy for obvious reasons. So Einstein goes to his new digs, temporary digs, with three other guys. First guy, they're all happy to see him there. First guy comes up to him and says, "Mr. Einstein, I'm really pleased to meet you. I've got an IQ of 130, and I want to get to know you better." So Einstein says, "Oh, very good. After lunch, let's bounce around a few concepts of astrophysics I've been thinking about." Second guy comes up to him and says, "Mr. Einstein, I'm not as smart as that first guy. I've got an IQ of 100, but I still want to get to know you." So Einstein says, "Well, let me put my grip away and let's play a game of chess." Third guy comes up to him and says, "Mr. Einstein, I'm not as smart as those other two guys. I've only got an IQ of 70, but I still want to get to know you." So Einstein asks him, "So where do you think interest rates are going?" I think that's a good joke. Anyway, with that as a preface, I've got a prediction. Long-term interest rates, which the Fed can't really control, are going up. And I say that for a couple of reasons. One, the last time we really had high interest rates in this country were in the early 80s, when the US government was paying over 15%, almost 20% at one point for money. Those were high interest rates. They've gone down. They went down then for the next 40 years to almost zero in 2022, almost zero. And then the Fed started raising interest rates, at least the money that it made available to banks, commercial banks. And they went as high, well, what did they peak out at? Almost 6%, something like that. Then they've driven them down, and now they're going up again. Here's the point I want to make. With the trillions of dollars that the government is spending above what its income is in taxes, it has to print money to finance the difference. And that's to the tune of about $2 trillion per year being sold to the Fed. The Fed buys US government paper. It goes into the commercial banking system where it's lent out with a fractional reserve multiplier, where a dollar goes into a commercial bank, it theoretically can lend, let's say, $10. So that's why raising interest rates can dampen inflation, because when interest rates go up, people don't want to borrow as much, the banks don't lend as much. I don't want to get into all that. I'll just say this, that at this point, inflation is going to start going much higher because of all this money that's being printed up. As interest rates go higher, a lot of people are going to get hurt because the country is very, very indebted in all ways: consumer debt, student debt, automobile debt, mortgage debt. Interest rates go up, you're asking for trouble. And the Fed doesn't want to see that happen. So it'll lower interest rates at the low end, but at the top, long term, 10 years and beyond, they really can't control that. And that's where the big money is. So interest rates from here are going higher. I haven't given a very good explanation because it's hard to sum up interest rates where volumes have been written about them in a 2-minute presentation. But that's my prediction for what it's worth. Refer
So
back
fundamentally, you're saying the
find out
Fed
what
doesn't
was written.
really control. Sorry, Doug. The Fed doesn't really control interest rates on the long end, like the 10-year plus. Is that what you're saying?
That's right. They can control the short end through the banking system by giving the banks more money. But on the long end, that's controlled by inflation. And the problem is that a lot of banks, when interest rates were low, loaded up on government bonds, risk-free asset. But interest rates go up, bond prices go down. And bond prices go down, those are major assets of the banks. And so we've got a number of banks in this country that are on the ragged edge of bankruptcy at this point. Interest rates go higher, it's going to get worse. And there's nothing the Fed can do about long-term interest rates.
Let me ask you this. Sorry.
I was going to say some evidence of that is the fact that unrealized losses for banks in the US is something like 3 times now what it was during the financial crisis. And the fact that, so there's risk-free, stuff that they invested in the bonds. So that shows what you're saying. And also, since the Fed cut rates 0.5 point recently, the 10-year is up 0.5 point. So it's gone exactly the wrong direction that people who think the Fed controls the world would think.
Exactly the opposite direction of what the Fed was trying to achieve. Exactly. And I can't speak to what's going to happen next week or next month. But if we have this conversation next year, I'm pretty confident interest rates are going to be higher. And it's going to be very unpleasant for a lot of people.
Let me ask you this. What do you think will be the first major bank, let's say the next major bank, to close its doors or something bad happened to it?
The bank they talk about most in that regard is Bank of America. But
I can feel it. It's my bank. It's got problems. I can feel it.
I don't know what bank you should use to keep your money. It would take analyzing the balance sheets of these banks to see where they've put their assets and what form they are. So I haven't done that, and I suppose I should. But that's the type of thing a professional accountant that's interested in that type of thing should do. I've got other fish to fry.
Yep. Porter Stansberry's done a lot of work on Bank of America. He definitely has pointed that out as like you pointed out, GM in the past. He thinks that's the first one to fall. So he's pretty good at calling those things.
Well, Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway has been selling gigantic amounts of Bank of America at this point.
The sign. That's a sign. Okay, so just so I got this straight, Michael, your prediction was that the Israeli war will expand and that Israel's odds of surviving kind of decrease the longer this goes on.
Yeah, the longer it goes on, definitely the odds decrease. They may survive, but you know how wars are. They're incredibly, it's a complex system of complex systems. Nobody really knows which way it'll go, but you can feel the energy is not in their favor the longer it drags out.
Well, yeah, and in addition to that, it's basically a citizen soldier army, and those guys that are in the army aren't working at their regular jobs. And investors are a little bit loath to put money into businesses in a country that could be in trouble. So this war is going to become unaffordable for Israel in addition.
That's an incredibly important point.
All right. Okay, so I think we got it for this week, guys. We will be back next week with more consequential observations and predictions from you. So thank you both for joining us again. This is awesome. I appreciate it.
Thank you from Bangkok.
And thank you from Colombo, Sri Lanka, where I've been for the last week. That's another story for the future, perhaps.
We'll have to get that. Okay, awesome. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.